Hey, what's going on? It's your boy BT, and I came here to talk some boxing with the thousands of True School Sports subscribers. Now, in today's video, I'm gonna do my best to explain the difference between a boxing promoter and a boxing manager. Because for people who don't who just start following boxing, who become fans, they might hear these terms thrown around by fighters, and they might hear these terms thrown around by promoters and people in boxing, and they might not be able to differentiate the two. So this video is for me to help them differentiate the two, what the job description, what the job requirements are of each of these key people in boxing. So here we go. So what is a boxing manager? We'll start with boxing manager. What is a boxing manager? What is their role, and how do they help the fighters? Well, a boxing manager is just somebody that, it's in the title. He manages the career of the boxer. So his job is basically to guide the fighter throughout his career. In my other videos where I've kind of answered these basic questions about boxing, I've stated that boxing is a sport of free enterprise where you get to move how you see fit. It's not like certain other sports where you have a schedule and you got to play certain teams. You can pick and choose fights. Depending on how big of a star you are in boxing, you might have more options. The less of a star you are, the less options you have in boxing. So, a boxing manager, his job is to guide the fighter and protect his best interests. And sometimes that does frustrate the fans, because what boxing fans want and what a boxing manager knows is best for his fighter are oftentimes two different things. And because of that, sometimes fights get delayed and they don't happen when the fans want them to happen. But nonetheless, the boxing managers are very important. Now, there's been an argument through many years that boxing managers sometimes aren't necessary for fighters, because their job is essentially to say yes or no. You're basically getting paid to say yes or no to a fight. But a good boxing manager will do more than that. A good boxing manager will go above and beyond for his fighters. I'll give you an example of one of my favorite boxing managers in the sport right now, and shout out to my guy Peter Khan. Peter Khan is a great boxing manager who manages tons of fighters. From the likes of George Kambosos Jr. to Amir Imam to Emmanuel Tago. He's got a lot of good fighters, and Peter will go above and beyond for his fighters. Aside from just getting them, the fights and saying yes or no, like most managers, he'll actually be in the gym with his fighters, wrapping their hands if he needs to, doing whatever he can to serve the fighters, and also put them in a position to get them sponsorships. So a good boxing manager will not only look out for your best interests in the ring, but he'll do what he can outside the ring to make sure you're taken care of, like getting you sponsorships and putting you in a position to succeed, and putting you in a position of power to make the extra money you need as a fighter, because there's only a very short window of time to make money in boxing, because boxing is a very short period of time. The career span of a boxer is not that long in relation to their life. You'll seldomly see a fighter box for 20 years like a Floyd Mayweather or something like that. So boxing manager is very important, and this decision on who you have in your corner as your boxing manager can sometimes make or break, not sometimes, it will make or break a fighter. So this is very, very important for fighters when they pick and choose who they have behind them guiding their careers in their boxing managers. Hopefully I explained the title of a boxing manager well. Now, what is a boxing promoter? Because sometimes people and casual fans, they hear these terms thrown around and they think they're the same thing, and they're not. They have two different agendas and they have two different job descriptions. So a boxing manager guides the career of the fighter. A boxing promoter, he promotes the fights for his company. And basically what a boxing promoter is like a Don King. These guys, their jobs are to promote the boxing shows. So while the manager is focused on the big picture of the fighter and where they go long term, a boxing promoter's view is more short term. It's more, what can they do to promote their boxing show on the night. And a boxing promoter's job is basically to put on a boxing show, a boxing card. So let's say you have 5 fights. They gotta fill the slots for all 5 of these fights, and they got to make sure that they're entertaining fights, that they're fights that people that pay their hard-earned money to come see enjoy and are satisfied with, so that when they put on another boxing show in the future, they want to come back for more. A good boxing promoter will care about the consumers and put on good fights for the fans, good fights to where they know that fans will be satisfied and happy with the performances. Now, as far as boxing promoters go, you have small time boxing promoters and you have big time boxing promoters, and let me explain to you the difference. A small time boxing promoter is somebody that puts on boxing shows only in a certain area, local boxing shows. So like here where I live in Miami, we have small boxing companies here that put on local shows only, and there's not like big television networks involved. You got small companies like M&R Boxing Promotions that do a lot of small boxing shows in Miami, and you got Bad Promotions, who also do a lot of small boxing shows in the Broward County area. And these small promotional companies, they exist in many different states, and they're very important to the overall health of boxing, because before, you know, your guys like Floyd Mayweather or Canelo Alvarez or Terrence Crawford or, you know, Roman Cholatito Gonzalez, before any of these guys became what they became in boxing, they had to have the opportunity to fight somewhere, and a lot of times that somewhere was these small boxing shows, and it gives them the chance to showcase their skills. It gives them the chance to build their records up, and fight, you know, some people, you know, in the professional ranks of boxing, and find their footing and find their craft in the sport of boxing. So it's being a small time boxing promoter. You know, in Philadelphia, you got like Peltz Boxing. They've been doing small boxing shows there for about 3 decades plus now, and they do some of the best small boxing shows in the world. And it's very important, small time boxing promoters. Without them, the sport would cease to exist. Okay, so your small club shows are not to be overlooked. Now, big time boxing is a much different animal, because there's so many other factors that are involved with big time boxing. You have, first of all, most in comparison to small time boxing shows and small time boxing promotional companies, there's TV involved in big time boxing, and when there's TV involved, there's more money involved, and when there's more money involved, everything is more complex. You know, what did Biggie say? What did that Biggie song say? Seems like the more money we come across, the more problems we see. When there's more money involved, it's going to be more things to deal with. So as a big time boxing promoter, when you're putting on a show, you have more things to think about. You have to think about the site fee, the amount of money that you're paying to put a boxing show on in a particular venue. And unlike small time boxing promotional shows, it's going to cost more money to put a fight on in a big casino. Like, you know, when we the fans normally watch boxing or tune into ESPN or whatever, you know, Sky Sports, whatever big boxing show we watch, you know, we don't often take the time to think about how much it costs to actually put these shows on. But the operating costs for, let's say, a big fight at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, because to me, I think in American boxing, the pinnacle of, you know, how the pinnacle and the biggest you can get in American boxing, and maybe boxing in general, is to fight at the MGM Grand in the main event. Okay, so to put on a fight at the MGM Grand is very expensive for the promoter. So if a promoter is going to do a show at the MGM Grand, which costs you an arm and a leg, it's very expensive. Best believe he's going to make sure that it's going to be a big time fight with big names that people know, that people can get excited about, because he doesn't want to come out of this in the negatives or in the red. He wants to come out of this in the green and make some green in the process, because that's the ultimate goal at the end of the day for these boxing promoters. So they got to consider the site fees. They got to consider, you know, the money they're going to pay, you know, in conjunction for TV rights, because, you know, I'll give you an example. Bob Arum, who's a big time promoter who runs Top Rank Boxing, Bob Arum has a deal with ESPN, and guess what? He's got to pay ESPN a certain amount of money to get his fights on ESPN, for the visibility for his fighters, and then he's got to pay for the site fee, the amount of money it costs for the actual venue, to put the fight on there, and then he's got to pay the actual fighters. So there's a lot more factors that go on to putting a big time boxing show, and that's why I'm saying I think, you know, boxing promoters are often looked at that in a negative light by boxing fans because sometimes there's corruption and you know, listen, nobody's perfect. We're all humans. And if they've done anything wrong, guess what? They're gonna have to deal with they're gonna have to deal with the consequences of that when they're no longer here. But listen, they have a tough job on their hands. Boxing promoters, it's a tireless job. They got to constantly work. You know, they got to deal with the moods and the personalities of everybody involved in the fight, from TV to the fighters to the trainers to the managers. There's a lot that a boxing promoter, particularly in big time boxing, especially, has to deal with. So it's much different than being a small time boxing promoter. But either way you slice it, being a small time boxing promoter or a big time boxing promoter is much different to that of being a big time, or not a big time, but just being a boxing manager in general. Because a boxing manager in general has to protect the long term interests of the fighter he represents, and if he's not doing that, then he's not a good boxing manager, and he's gonna get his fighter severely hurt, and he doesn't really care about him. And sometimes in boxing you have that. You have boxing managers that don't really care about their fighters as much as they lead on with their fighters, and they throw them in certain fights that they're not ready for. And this gets them severely hurt. It damages their confidence, and they're never the same fighters again. So this stuff is very, very, very important, and it's very important to the fighters and their long-term success that they get this stuff right. So I hope you guys came from this video with a bit more understanding for, you know, the job titles and the job descriptions and responsibilities of a boxing promoter and boxing manager. Hopefully you learned something. If you learned something new, let me know in the comments what you think. Take the time to subscribe, and like I say in every single one of these videos, you can love me or you can hate me, but I'm just a kid from Dania. So until next time, take care, guys.